Well, hey Darius, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate
Covered a
it.
lot of great things about you, and I guess for the audience, would you just share your story and how you came about running 42 Macro?
Yeah, Tony, it's thanks again for having me on the podcast, man. I appreciate you. I've been seeing you do a lot of great work. So it's just a really it's a blessing to be here, my friend. So answering that question, that's a loaded question for me.
It's very loaded.
It's
It's
a
called
very loaded
unscripted. It's called unscripted for a reason, right? So, like,
exactly.
here's the wide field you can play in.
Yeah, well, I
But
appreciate
I
that,
promise
man.
you, we'll narrow down the questions.
No, no worries, man. It's so I've come a long way, and it's certainly through the help and the guidance of a lot of great mentors and family members and friends who really invested the time and the time to help me achieve a lot of great things, and I'm really grateful to be here as a representation of all their efforts. So I guess we'll start with my childhood. I guess I had a pretty rough upbringing, certainly by American standards. My parents were drug addicts most for my entire childhood, and we spent a lot of
Mm.
time in and out of homeless shelters. Spent some time homeless a couple times, and so I've
Was it
seen
was
kind of
that
the
here
worst
in
of that.
was that here in Washington?
Yeah, but both in Washington. In fact, so when I was born in East St. Louis, which at the time was
Mm.
the murder capital of the country. I lived in the worst neighborhood in East St. Louis, the Samuel
Wow.
Gumper Projects, in the murder capital of the country. So you can imagine the kind of stuff I've seen growing up and been experiencing since my early childhood. We moved to Seattle the summer heading into my sixth grade year. We were homeless in St. Louis prior to that. We moved to Seattle on a Greyhound bus, and honestly didn't have anywhere to go. And I think we stayed the first night or first couple of nights in Seattle in the Greyhound bus station down there
Wow.
downtown by the Space Needle. And then we finally got an opportunity to get some housing. I want to say we were staying in motels for a while, and then we ultimately wound up in a Section 8 type housing, for a while. So, our home situation was always tenuous growing up.
Mhm.
Obviously, a lot of folks have families that dealt with drugs and alcohol abuse and all that kind of stuff. We had an additional layer of physical and emotional abuse as well with my late stepfather. But that's neither here nor
Mhm.
there in terms of trying to explain, my winding journey to get here. I'll kind of wrap it up in terms of just saying, like, one of the things that really most benefited my life in terms of getting me into this seat in front of you, in front of so many thousands of people, is when I was heading into third grade. We were evicted, and we were my mom, my brother, and I. We lived in a homeless shelter near a school called Delmar Harbor. This is in St. Louis. And the way school zoning worked in St. Louis is that even the best schools like a Delmar Harvard, which I think was a college
Mhm.
preparatory academy, even the best schools were subject to standard like zoning districting. And so, because
Wow.
we were in this homeless shelter that was near Delmar Harvard, my brother and I got to attend this incredible school for a year. I was in third grade; he was in fourth grade. By the end of that year, when we had moved back to our low income housing projects, both my brother and I were multiple grades ahead of everyone in our
Mhm.
classes. And that kind of remained the case for the rest of my scholastic experience. Even when I moved to Seattle and went to sixth grade, went to Washington Middle School and West Seattle High School. I was I was an advanced student the entire
Mhm.
time. I would say primarily because of that
Right.
experience at Delmar Harvard. So wrapping it up, I've just had a great opportunity to play football at Yale. I was 4.0 student, great student in high school. My high school coach Tom Burgraff really created those opportunities for me by
Mhm.
making connections with the Ivy League coaches. The rest is history in that regard, and kind of the rest is history in terms of where I am today. So let's get into it.
Yeah. Well, man, that's quite the journey. I gotta say.
Yeah. I've seen a lot, man. I'm only 37 years old, but I've lived
Yeah.
enough life for a couple people, and I'm really proud to say that. And I'm really proud to say that I've learned a lot from those processes, and they really do influence how I view the world and how I try to treat the world
Mhm.
here in my adult life.
Yeah. It's quite the blessing for sure. And you know, when you got to Yale, was there like a mind shift, or did you feel prepared to be around other top tier
Yale's?
students? Yeah.
No, not at all, man. That's a great question. So I got smacked in the face. So when going back to this, this process of my education in high school, I was always, just the best student in my class. It was very easy
Mhm.
for me to walk in and glance at the material and take a test and get an A. That was like my scholastic experience for most of my childhood. When I got to Yale, it was a smack in the face in that regard. I did not
Mhm.
possess the skills required to be a good student. I didn't have any sort of real foundational training at being a good student. I was a smart person, but guess what? When you get to Yale, when you get to college in general, let alone an institution like Yale, everybody is smart, and particularly at that place, extremely smart. And
Mhm.
so my lack of training in terms of being a good student and having the good study habits really showed up. And in fact, I was on the verge of failing out of school towards the end of my freshman year. You have to maintain. Yale has very strict, obviously, academic standards, and I was not meeting those standards, or at least I was on the verge of not meeting those standards, and I wound up on academic probation for the entirety of my sophomore year, which was the best thing that's ever happened. One of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Yeah.
I've had these very serendipitous things that have happened to me throughout my life, which could be a theme of this our conversation today, of taking a negative situation and turning it into a positive situation that has ramifications from a long term perspective. And the second time is this academic probation experience. I basically learned how to become an Ivy League student throughout this process.
Mhm.
That every day after practice, I had to go to the study hall and this and that, and check in with my counselors on a weekly basis. And it was a very arduous program, but I'm actually really grateful for that because it gave me the tools that I needed from a study habit perspective to not just succeed at Yale, but also to succeed in life and in the workplace. I went from being on the verge I went from needing academic probation at the end of my freshman year
Uh-huh.
to my last couple of years at Yale. I was a 4.0 student. And so
Wow.
that transformation process of learning those study habits was really, really effective for me.
So what do you feel changed? Was it the motivation, or was it the mindset that, there was no other choice
It was
but
a lot
to.
of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a lot of things. Thank you. I appreciate that question because one, I needed to get better at just being motivated and attending class, attending section, and really immersing myself in the material. But creating structure in my day.
Mhm.
It's odd, to think that you're, a college football player and you lack structure, but we have plenty of structure for all the football related aspects of our days,
Uh-huh.
right? And you're a former professional athlete, you understand that. Like
Yeah.
the part of my day that is structured is very structured. And I need to be very everywhere on time, or else there'll be very serious consequences. However, the 3-4 hours of the day that you have as a student athlete remaining, that aren't structured, I was spending those 3 to 4 hours very poorly. I wasn't attacking
Mhm.
my my academics the way that they should have been attacked in terms of earmarking the appropriate amount of time for each class and attending each class and all this other stuff, and following up with the professors and making those types of connections and connections with my fellow students and student athletes. So I was just a sea change of all the things that I needed to learn. I should have learned prior to going to Yale,
Yeah.
and had I had I grew up in a situation where I could have attended a Del Mar Harvard like many of the kids who
Right.
attended Ivy League schools. If I had those opportunities growing up, then I would have walked in that place with the scholastic with the study habits necessary to be a 4.0 student from the get go. But I didn't, and I had to learn that on the fly, and learn that on the job.
Mhm. And did you have people help you, or was
Oh yeah.
that just okay?
Yeah, that's an underlying theme of my life, and I think the underlying theme of all of our lives, if we're being honest and humble about it. I would not be sitting here if it weren't for, you think about the path that I've taken to get here. Some of the more
Mhm.
important people in my life. Miss Peck, my third grade teacher, the teacher that sort of set me on a different path from a
Mhm.
scholastic achievement standpoint. Think about my high school football coaches, Tom Burgraff, to Fred Ropke, Roland Ruff, those people who took me under their wing and said, okay, you're not just this you're not one of these kids who is going to be another has been. West Seattle High School
Right.
has got a long list of guys who should have done a lot of great things professionally in terms of being professional athletes, but never really came to fruition. And so they saw that I was a great student and had a lot of great potential, and really, they kind of rode me in a way that was
Yeah.
kind of uncomfortable at the time, but they saw that potential and they put
Uh-huh.
that in there. my college coaches, Tony Reno, Coach Clark, those people would really rode me in a way. And then obviously, Dean Salovey, who's now the president of Yale now, he was one of the folks that I would check in with on a regular basis during academic probation. So I have a lot of wonderful people who've taken a liking to me and really put in that effort to mentor me, and which is
Hmm.
why I'm so keen and so focused on giving back and paying that forward today.
Yeah, and also it's interesting because it's like it's almost they recognize the gift you had before you realize the gift you had,
100%.
right?
100%.
So how'd you get into your business? Tell us a little bit about 42 Macro and that
Yeah.
journey.
Well, it's fun, man. It's a funny story, man, because when I got to Yale, I thought uh, I wanted to be in government, like government. Really, local politics was kind of the thing
Hmm.
that I was most interested in. I thought eventually maybe I would graduate up to being, representative or senator over time. But being able to help influence, people's lives and impact people's lives, having experienced what I've experienced growing up,
Hmm.
being homeless and without food for without lights and without all these basic
Yeah.
resources that we take for granted as Americans, that obviously folks who are paying attention to this or who listen to this from around the world understand that that's a lot of what the world is, unfortunately.
Hmm.
um, and so really just trying to understand. Sorry, what was the question? My apologies, I think I rambled a little bit too much.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's great. It's like just the journey of 42 Macro
Oh,
and how it
starting, yeah.
started. Yeah, yeah,
My yeah,
yeah.
getting into finance. So getting into finance. So so going back to what I was thinking about, I wanted to go into government when I joined Yale, and was really kind of going down that path for most of my scholastic experience at Yale. It wasn't until the fall of 2008 until finance really piqued my interest. And the reason I say this is because of, obviously, you think fall of 2008, you're like, oh my God, the entire financial system is melting down. And it
Well, it's probably
was.
you were curious, like, why is it melting down?
Yeah, well, it's actually not even. I wasn't even curious. What made me curious was my former boss, the guy who ran for my former company. He put a full page ad in the YDN that said we're hiring, like in like the employment section, which is very unusual. It's like, duh, you're hiring. Like, no, no, no. In my head, I'm thinking like, of course you're hiring. Everyone's hiring. That's why you're advertising in the Yale Daily News. You want to get us to, kind of, you want to recruit Yale students. But what I learned from making a joke about that to my friends who had interned at, Lehman Brothers and
Yeah.
Barclays and and all these other places that
All the
their
big shops.
internships
Yeah.
exactly that no longer exist or got acquired. A lot of their internships got actually rescinded, and or put on
Mhm.
hold or deferred or something like that. So it was actually a really unique time in just in our little tiny bubble of Yale and Yale football, where it's like prior to 2008, you could just call somebody and get a job on Wall Street. That was the kind of the expectation.
Wow.
That was the nature of the Yale Football Network. And after 2008, that sort of ended. And so going back to this ad in the Yale Daily News, I'm like, well, I got to check this guy out. And, he's the only one. All my friends are like this. It's a total, for lack of a better word, part of my language, but it's a total shit show
Yeah.
in global financial markets and in this sector in particular. Why is this guy hiring? In the full page ad. So the rest is history. I obviously, was very intrigued by that, and kind of made a great connection with the folks that ran that place, and really did some great things with
So
that
you
business
just
for a long
sent in a
time.
resume and they were like, Let's interview this guy."
Well, it's funny because I didn't know my butt from my elbow in terms of finance, right? So it was almost like, all right, who the hell is this kid? But fortuitously, I did have a great story to tell, and still do have a great story to tell to this day. And what I think I demonstrated in that interview process is that I had the ability to learn. I had
Mhm.
acquired the skills necessary to be a good student at Yale and ultimately be a good employee, no matter where I went and whatever sector I went. I learned how to learn, which is probably the
Mhm.
number one thing that I learned at Yale.
And then subsequently, you spent time over there, and then what, 10 years or so, and yeah, it
12.
started.
Yeah, so we spent 12 years over there. Most recently, the last sort of 5 years or so, 5, 6 years as the head of the macro desk there, the head of the macro
Mhm.
team. Sort of, I'm known across global Wall Street for developing their econometric system and a lot of the risk
Mhm.
management systems associated with that. That sort of builds upon. I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Dalio. You are, of course, you're familiar with Dalio. Everyone's
Yeah.
familiar with Ray Dalio. That builds a lot of upon a lot of the frameworks that he's introduced over at Bridgewater.
Ah,
And so, that's sort of what catapulted my, celebrity is an extreme word here, but it's something cut celebrity by and a half twice. It catapulted my notoriety across
mhm.
global Wall Street because of my work with those tools and procedures. And we built a great business. It was 12 years. I thought I would retire there. Quite frankly, because we did build such a wonderful business. For pretty much scratch. When I started, there was hardly any revenues coming in the door, and when I left, there were quite a few revenues coming in the door. So it was great to be part of that. Be part of that journey. Wish my former colleagues well. Hope they continue to achieve some great things.
Yeah. So what are you finding in the market now? I mean, based on the research that you have, because so it sounds like a lot of it is based on historical data and then using that to project future direction. Is that my understanding of
Yeah.
what you do?
Can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be
Yeah.
able to.
Awesome. Let me
Yeah.
share my screen. If we're going to talk process, let's get into it. so um, so I'll give you guys just a quick overview of our research process here at 42 Macro. This is our most recent macro scouting report. We publish this presentation once a month to our subscribers. And what is it's the presentation is designed to give a holistic update on all these sort of growth, inflation, and policy drivers of asset markets, where we see things in those categories headed and how they're likely to influence asset markets in the context of our regime segmentation process. And so, in terms of how we think about what our investment process is, it's a three-step process that starts. The most important part of that process is identifying and positioning for the market regime. The market regime, in layman's terms, is the general disposition of asset markets, bullish or bearish, and more importantly, the general disposition of factor leadership within asset markets. So not just if the stock market's going up over time, but what kinds
Mhm.
of factors are leading the stock market from a beta, cyclicality, market cap, geographic perspective, et cetera, et cetera. And so, our primary objective is, helping investors stay on the right side of market risk by identifying and helping them position for the market regime based on our analysis of how the factors have historically performed, and how asset markets and the factors within asset markets have historically performed across time. Step two in that process is we use, to your point, Tony, using historical data to project a potential regime change using our macro weather model.
Mhm.
That's a quantitatively derived dynamic. That's a dynamic factor model, and it's a quantitative system that helps us identify the projected return profile for all the major asset classes. And more importantly, when we identify when those return profiles change, we can see how they're changing and evolving in a way that potentially strengthens our conviction in the current regime or erodes our conviction in the current regime in a way that
Mhm.
kind of leads us into what the next regime might be. And then lastly, we help investors prepare for regime change using qualitative signals, which is the summary of our research process that tries to connect the dots between growth, inflation, and how those dynamics are going to influence policymakers and ultimately how those policymaking decisions influence asset markets. So it's kind of a iterative three-step process. We're just growing
Mhm.
around, 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 and around on a daily basis in terms of absorbing and interpreting and ultimately contextualizing all the data therein.
So what's feeding all this data?
Yeah, so it's a lot. So I'll give you a quick overview of each of those steps of the process. So let's start with identifying and positioning for the market regime. We use our global macro risk matrix to identify and help in position for the market regime. What the global macro risk matrix is a regime segmentation process that allows us to score how asset markets are currently behaving relative to how they have behaved in each regime historically. So, for example, and we're doing this across all the major asset classes. So, this is equities, volatility products, commodities, currencies, and fixed income. And
Wow.
so, going back to the how the process works, using the S&P 500 as an example, the S&P 500 is currently bullish from the perspective of a volatility adjusted momentum signal. Historically speaking, the S&P 500 has been bullish in both Goldilocks and inflation. So, in this process, Goldilocks and inflation are getting a point for today's bullish signal. And so we repeat that same process daily across each of the 42 factors in the model to determine, which regime has the highest sum and share of confirming markets. And right now, reflation has the highest sum and highest share, and that's been the case since about mid-March. The prior regime was the Goldilocks regime that we experienced as investors from essentially mid-November through mid-March. And so, it's our job to, refresh the table and not tell the markets what they need to do or how they need to behave, but
Mhm.
observe how they are behaving, and more importantly, how their behavior might be changing at the margins, and then layering on our macro weather model signals and our fundamental research process signals to get a sense of, okay, we might be on the precipice of regime change, and here are all the different changes in your portfolio you need to make to stay on the right side of market risk. And one quick
Mhm.
thing before I even get into the macro weather model, Tony, if you're watching this as a retail investor, you don't need to stay on the right side of market risk. You can be long an asset that's declining in price for as long as you want until it goes to zero. You can be short an asset that's appreciating in price for as long as you want until your broker stops you out of the trade. And so that's that you can do. You can lose it. What I'm saying is you can lose as much money as you want as a retail investor until either your broker stops you out or the price of the security goes to zero. If you're a professional investor managing other people's money, you can't do that, and that's obviously a
Yeah.
no-no. So what we try to do when we say stay on the right side of market risk is identifying and understanding the direction of travel that asset markets are choosing to take. It's not necessarily the destination, but it's the sequence and the direction of travel that asset markets are taking, and how that direction of travel and how the principal components of macro are influencing factor dispersion underneath the hood. Not just, okay, is the market up, but what's leading and what's lacking, and ultimately those types of bets are either what get you paid as a professional investor, or they get
Mhm.
you out of your seat as a professional investor. So obviously
Right.
our process is focused on keeping our clients in their seats. So um, getting into the macro weather model, what this process is a dynamic factor model that's designed to help investors predict the rolling 3-month forward return profile for the major asset classes. And
Mhm.
what the bear signals in this table indicate is that you should be expecting lower than baseline returns for that particular market over the next 3 months. The bullish signals suggest that you should be expecting higher than baseline returns for that particular asset class over the next 3 months, and then the neutral returns suggest you should be experiencing, sort of normal type returns and volatility conditions in the particular market over the next 3 months. And how it's doing that is we are scoring each of the principal components of macro vis-a-vis the real economy cycles on the left and the financial economy cycles on the right through their own regime segmentation process, which produces a set of excess return dispersion for each of these markets on an independent basis. So, any given day, any one of these, principal component features could change its signal, and that change in signal will have implications for each of those five asset class signal composite signals in the middle of the page. So, this is a very robust and dynamic process in the same way that both the economy and asset markets are very robust and dynamic in terms of how we have to position for things and events
Now,
as
is this all
investors.
happening in real time?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So as you see, this is
Wow.
today's refresh, so May 13th. So this is any given day, we can refresh the model tomorrow, and let's say right now, both of our liquidity indicators, U.S. liquidity vis-a-vis our net liquidity model, and our global liquidity vis-a-vis our global liquidity proxy, those are both trending lower. Well,
Mhm.
tomorrow we can refresh the model, and one of them inflects into a positive trend. We have no idea how long the positive trend. This model will have no idea how long the positive trend is likely to persist. But what the model does know is that the condition, for example, let's just go look at liquidity specifically. The condition of being, accelerating from a liquidity standpoint has forward-looking implications from the perspective of asset markets. So, for
Mhm.
example, if we're using our global liquidity proxy as an example, right now it's currently contributing the negative, the following back test to the composite signals back in the middle of that page there. And what these back to excess return dispersion back tests indicate is the types, the rolling, the change from the rolling 3-month baseline return that you should experience as an investor, that we have empirically experienced as investors based on that condition. So if we went from a negative trend in liquidity to a positive trend in liquidity, let's say tomorrow or at some point in the coming future, then we would go from produce that particular signal would go from producing negative excess returns for the stock market, the bond market, commodity market, and Bitcoin, to
Mhm.
positive excess returns for the stock market, commodity market, and Bitcoin and not much change, or it goes not much change for the dollar. And so we're doing, again, the same process on a daily basis across all the features in the macro weather model to identify what the likely 3-month performance of the asset class is likely to be. That may not guarantee, there's no guarantee. Obviously, no models are perfect, but we do know
Right.
is that our models back test really well if you're using them as a risk management overlay in terms of being exposed to broader market risk. The Sharpe ratios for our macro weather model back tests are significantly higher than the Sharpe ratios for the asset classes themselves.
Big shout out and a huge thank you to Zekin for making this happen. They have an amazing platform. Check out their website, zekin.com, zeacon.com. So do you find that your clients can interpret this data differently from each other? Is
Yeah,
that is
all the
that what you're
time.
finding? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And so what we try to do is, we stick to our process, right? Like, we
Hmm.
have a simple, it's a simple 3-step process that's built on top of very complicated systematic procedures. And so,
Hmm.
when we communicate with our clients, we have, 3 different tiers of clients. We have a very unique business model in the sense that we publish the same research to investors across the entire sophistication spectrum. Whether you are the most sophisticated hedge fund manager in the world or the least sophisticated retail investor in the world, we
Hmm.
create opportunities for you to have access to all of that research. Depends on what you are, and then we create specific products within our research to speak directly to the retail investor, speak directly to the investment advisor, to speak directly to the sophisticated asset manager. And so what we're trying to do is narrow that information asymmetry between the best investors in the world, many of whom I've forged relationships with over the past 15 years, and the least sophisticated investors in the world who deserve the same return
Hmm.
outcomes and deserve the same opportunity to make money and grow their retirement savings and really create positive outcomes for their families as our sophisticated asset manager clients. And so that's something we really pride ourselves on, is democratizing what we consider to be the highest end of institutional finance from a macro risk management perspective.
Hmm. So what do you find the difference between the institutional investor versus the retail in terms of mindset?
Ooh, mindset. That's a great question. So
Yeah.
the the institutional investor, 9 times out of 10, the institutional investors that we tend to work with, which tend to be the above median institutional investor that's not changing seats every 6 months or every 9 months. Uh, those people tend to be focused on managing risk, and not necessarily focused on their predictions or their what they want to have happen in the future based on their current positions, but rather what could go wrong. They have a
Hmm.
very unique and acute focus on what could go wrong, and they're constantly doing research on things that can make their core theses incorrect. I would say the average retail investor, in my opinion, is primarily focused on trying to predict the path of the market, which in my
Yeah.
opinion is a flawed exercise, because one, no one has been able to predict the path of the market with any
Right.
consistency over time. The best investors in the history of the world, and Jim Simons just passed last week, who is in fact the best investor in the world, made more money than in the history of anybody in investing without predicting a single market outcome or economic outcome. And so the reality is what we try to do with our retail investor clients is help coach them through some of the common behavioral heuristics that tend to prevent them from achieving their strategic investment objectives. Like if I can share my screen again. Yeah, there we go. And so yeah, we in the same presentation we have a list of common behavioral heuristics that prevent investors from achieving their strategic investment objectives. And one of my
Mhm.
favorite that I coach investors on, particularly on the retail side, is the illusion of validity, which is cognitive bias that tells us that suggests that we tend to be very overconfident about our predictions for the future,
Yeah.
and that's just a natural function of how human beings work. And so you need to be cognizant of that as an investor, because what I think retail investors do that is very differently than our institutional asset manager clients, and more importantly, I think it's not just differently, but I think they're doing it incorrectly, in my opinion, is they formulate their portfolios, the positions that are in their portfolios, primarily upon their predictions of what's going to happen in the economy and asset markets. And the reality is, no one is good enough at predicting what's going to happen in the economy and asset markets for that to be the foundational basis of your entire portfolio. It can be, some positions in your portfolio, if you have a really big, a lot of conviction in a particular company or particular theme, like, AI or something like that.
Yeah.
Sure, that's fine. You can have a lot of strategic conviction in that, but that should not be the only basis that gets you in and out of those positions. And more importantly, dialing up and dialing down the position sizes associated with those positions and themes needs to be a separate process that is not reliant on your predictions, because we know that human beings are really bad at A, predicting, and
Yeah.
B, they're really bad at responding to new incremental information. We tend to overweight negative things. We tend to have a lot of optimism when it comes to our own predictions and our own
Mhm.
expected path of our portfolio. So there's a lot of behavioral heuristics that we try to solve for it with various components in our research and various processes and procedures within our research. And I think we're doing a pretty good job, but obviously, we can always get better at it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because you're bringing in data from practically the whole world, right?
Yeah.
So, how would you say geopolitical events fit into the model, and how much does that affect the model?
That's a great question, Tony. That's something I've personally, I wouldn't say struggled with, but we've had all these different geopolitical flare ups throughout my career, right? Going back to like
Mhm.
2010, there was the North Korea missiles, and, it
COVID.
was COVID, and obviously that Russia, Ukraine, and what's obviously going on with Israel and Hamas. We've had uh, these issues flare up, and each time I wind up in the same place, but each iteration I wound up in the same place sooner than I ultimately took me in previous iterations, which is none of us understands the complicated dynamics that have caused the geopolitical situation in the first place and how they're
Mhm.
going to evolve over time. Well, it's one thing to understand them. It's another thing to understand how this human behavior is going to evolve over time, right? These are
Yeah.
human beings making decisions based on their emotional responses to things that are happening to them. And so it's impossible to model that with any and give you any sort of degree of confidence around any model-based projection. So what we do is we continue to lean on our risk management processes. We lean on what that market regime signaling process is telling us. If the geopolitical conflict is big enough to create a new market regime, then it will show up in our nowcasting process, and then we can respond to that with changes in our portfolio. What we're trying to do, generally speaking, here at 42 Macro, is be long the things that are going to go up in price, and not
Hmm.
be and be not either be short if you're on the institutional side, or not be long the things that are going down in price if you're on the retail side. Just being out of those things, and being long the things that are going up, and not in the things that are going down, or short the things that are going down. That activity is very different than predicting where markets are going to go. Like, I want people to understand, if they take anything from this discussion today, it should be that making money in asset markets is not equivalent to predicting where markets are going to go. Making money in asset markets is being long the things that are going to go up, and
Right.
short and or out of things that are going to go down. And you don't need to predict the future in order to do that. In fact, I would
Yeah.
argue predicting the future is a headwind to doing that well on a consistent basis.
But yet it's so prevalent in the retail market,
Oh yeah.
right? It's like how do you change that behavior when it's a cultural thing?
Well, the education, and I think we've
Yeah.
done a great job, and we've, knock on wood, we've been very fortunate and very blessed over the past few years to grow our business to the size that it's grown, and more
Hmm.
importantly, having the impact that we see that we're having amongst our retail clients. We have people tweeting at me or in our community chat on a regular basis saying, "Hey, man, like, before I found 42 Macro, I was essentially, for lack of a better word, I was lost as an investor, and
Yeah.
I was not experiencing good outcomes in my portfolio. I was a victim of what we call bear porn, which is that never-ending spew of bearish information, which is a big business in finance, particularly for anyone who's selling anything to retail investors. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback that this processes and the procedures and the asset allocation programs that we produce and market to them have worked, and have produced really good outcomes for them and their families. And not only is it creating better outcomes in their portfolios, but it's also creating better outcomes in their brains and in how they interpret
Hmm.
financial market information and how they respond to incremental information. And I'm just really grateful for, I'm really grateful that we are doing what I wanted, what I set out to do when we started this business, which is narrow that information gap and that information
That in-
asymmetry between our top end institutional asset manager clients and our maybe less sophisticated retail clients.
yeah, I mean, because I mean, if you think about how you grew up, right? You didn't get introduced to finance till college, right? And even then, it was
Senior year of
you
college.
started that journey as a joke,
I
right?
thought an investment bank in 2008. What if you'd asked me what an investment bank was? I would have thought it would be like a local Schwab branch. You know, like you go in there and they tell you what to do with your portfolio. I had no
Yeah.
idea like there was this whole giant ecosystem and infrastructure, underlying the economy that was, the financial services industry and all the leverage and speculation associated with that industry.
Mhm.
That was all stuff that I've learned since summer of 2008, and obviously learned at a very high level. But we're very grateful for I'm really grateful for the path that I've taken to get here because it's
Mhm.
really put an ethos of giving back and opening doors for people who or may have been like me, which is, man, I don't know, I don't know anything about this industry. I don't know
Yeah.
anything about investing. And so, being able to give back and help people, regular, ordinary people like myself, really take advantage of and create better outcomes for their families. Because at the end of the day, what's finance, right? What are we doing here as retail investors? I say this on a weekly basis to our clients. Your number one goal as a retail investor shouldn't be trying to figure out dealer gamma positioning or monetary plumbing so you can try to figure out where the market's going next week. Your
Mhm.
only goal as a retail investor should be to retire on time and comfortably.
Yep.
So do
And provide
things
for your
that
family.
yeah, exactly. Do things that make you retire on time and comfortably. That's what your goal is. And so, we try to, we sound different from a lot of research and risk management providers. And that's by design because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do at 42 Macro is take 15 years of learning and having great conversations like these and intense debates as well with some of the world's best institutional asset managers all around the world and having and taking 15 years of learning and forcing that through a tight funnel and creating an investment process out of that.
Mhm.
What's the best what are the best practices that these folks are doing to manage fixed income risk, these folks are doing to manage currency risk, these folks are doing to manage equity risk? How can I create a robust and repeatable process that takes the best of from practice standpoint and really and provide that to our clients? And I think we've done a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, it sounds like. And then, you know, looking back, I mean, what would you say you're most proud of? And if you were to provide, 5 tips for the guy that's trying to get into this business, what would that be?
Ooh, good question. I'm certainly most proud of the global impact that we have. Like I said, we have clients on a regular basis, communicating with us that we are truly having a material impact in their families' lives, whether it be, saving them, preventing them, helping them not lose a ton of money heading into a big bear
Mhm.
market, or taking advantage of a big bull market and actually making money and blocking out all the bear porn noise that they're constantly bombarded with. So that's probably the number one thing I'm most proud of is the just the sheer size and global nature of our reach. I mean, I get stopped now, like I'll be walking through New York City or even in Miami, the restaurant in Miami with my wife, and some guy will be like, "Hey, are you Darius Dale?" like, and so like that's a cool thing, man. Like, I certainly didn't start 42 Macro with that being one of my goals, but it's a blessing because it means that we're actually having the impact that we set out to provide. So
Mhm.
that's one of the things that I'm most proud of. What else? And then 5 tips that I would give to someone maybe starting in our business. Starting in, what do you mean by just finance in general, or what I do
Yeah, just
specifically?
finance in
Finance in general.
in general.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So the number one thing I'll say is this is an industry where um, the amount of time, the amount of success you have is going to be very, very correlated with the amount of time you put into it. I think I could say that for most industries, but
Mhm.
finance in particular is one of these industries where not only is there a lot of technical know-how that you need to know and learn,
Mhm.
but there is a sort of we have not agreed as investors and as people in this industry on necessarily the best path one should take to be the
Mhm.
best quote unquote investor or the best quote unquote deal maker on the sell side or the best quote unquote. There is still a range of ways of methods to achieve success, and so this is why I think like having, the amount of time you spend is really, really critical in terms of, like, you got to just put in the hours, because there's not just a lot of stuff that you need to know from a technical standpoint, but you also need to know the various means and methods that people who are successful have employed. And it's not all one cookie cutter methodology, no matter what field of finance you get in, whether it be sales and trading, or investment management, investment banking. There's a lot of different avenues to be wealth management. There's many. What I'm trying to say is there's many ways to skin the cat, and if you're not figuring
Mhm.
out what those different ways are, you might not create the best opportunity set for yourself in terms of not just being successful in terms of finding what you do best, but also creating opportunities, finding firms that might fit your skill set. So that's probably number one. Number two, definitely align yourself with great mentors, and
Mhm.
be valuable to your mentors and make them want to mentor you. One of the things, like I said earlier in this discussion, is I'm the beneficiary of some incredible mentors.
Mhm.
I love my mom to death. Is one of the most important people in my life. But I didn't have the kind of parental guidance at home growing up that could put me in a lot of these great opportunities. And that's neither
Yeah.
here nor there. They were struggling with their own addiction issues and whatnot. And God bless them for overcoming those things in my adult life. But if I didn't have the kind of mentors and the kind of teachers and the coaches who really took a real stake in me in terms of helping me get to where I went, or helping me get to this place that you see here today, I wouldn't be here. And so, just really the value of mentors is, I can't stress that enough. And for folks who are listening that maybe on the older side of that spectrum, the value of mentorship can't be stressed enough. You got to make time to give back and pay it forward. I find it to be one of the most rewarding things that I do in my adult life, is mentoring young kids. A few other things that I would say: get you need to be very emotionally detached from failure.
Mhm.
You're not you start a business, you go into any career, especially a career as competitive as finance, and increasingly competitive as finance will be, because I think over time the number of seats that human beings occupy in this industry is going to continue to shrink, and may even
Yep.
shrink at an accelerating pace. The ability to stay gainfully employed, and actually having success in such a competitive field, increasingly competitive field, man, it's I, I really, I don't want to scare anybody, but the
Right.
stuff that I see these AI bots doing these days, it's just like,
Yep.
I might not even have a job in 10 years, like, and I kind of have joke about that, but you really do need to make sure you're staying abreast of all those kinds of things, because again, it's gonna change. It may change pretty rapidly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Thanks for sharing that, especially with AI. I mean, we just had a guy here the other day, and he goes, AI is it's the brain revolution.
Yeah,
Where we're replacing the brain,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because first in the industrial revolution it was muscle,
yeah.
and so
I
you
agree.
got the muscle in the brain. What's left of us? It's pretty scary.
Yeah, no, it is pretty scary, right? Like, look, there's going to be two types of AI adoption, right? There's going to be simple AI that replaces easy to replicate tasks, and then there's going to be complicated AI that makes people who have very complicated skills, makes them be able to sort of iterate those skills faster
Mhm.
on a grander scale. So ultimately, you're just going to need less people. Both, you need less
Yeah.
people on the lower end of the sophistication spectrum. You will need less people on the higher end of the sophistication spectrum, and perhaps that frees people up to start new business. What I think is going to be an natural outcrop of that is that larger companies are probably going to have less people. So
Mhm.
talented people at larger companies are going to wind up smaller companies that hopefully take advantage of some of this technological development to create specialized solutions for specialized problems, for highly complicated problems. I think that's going to be the avenue for human beings to sort of, I don't know. I don't want to say escape AI. It's like we're running away from a robot, but like, kind of create a moat, keep a moat around yourself, is to
Yeah.
figure out how to use AI to solve a very, very important but very specific thing that a larger company might not have time or the desire to do.
Well, yeah. Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thank you for your time. I know you're a busy man. Probably got a lot of other uh,
On
webinars and seminars to
No,
get on,
I
but
I will say, Tony. this is great, man, because I rarely get to talk about my background
Mhm.
these days. Most of the time I'm on a podcast, I get to just talk about finance and economics and what I think is going to happen in the markets and the economy. And I'm grateful for those opportunities because it gives us an opportunity to connect with a lot broader audience so that we
Yeah.
can share what we're doing differently at 42 Macro and how that can be useful. So that's great. But one of the things that I'm grateful for in this particular conversation is, there's a lot of people who don't know that they can do this
Yeah.
because they don't have the mentors in their lives that tell them that they can do this. I was very fortunate to have a lot of great mentors in my life that told me that I could do this. And so, what I want to leave people with watching this, particularly any young people watching this, is that you can do this. It's going to be really effing hard. There's a lot of work
Mhm.
you need to put in to get to this point, um, but you can do this. And I want you to know that if you're someone who grew up in the kind of horrible situations that I grew up in, I'm not familiar with your background, but maybe you've experienced some of these same things too. That there is an opportunity for you to get ahead and provide a better outcome, a better family situation for yourselves and your family. So, if people take away another thing from this conversation is that you can do this.
I think that's important to know because I grew up on a tiny little island, and never would I imagine you know interviewing somebody like you who's come a long way. But just even hearing and learning about your background is like, wow,
Thank you.
right? It's a combination of faith
Amen.
and God looking out for you,
Amen.
because you figure most people from where we come from, they don't get this opportunity,
No,
you know.
no.
But it is possible, that I know.
Amen. And
and,
God has been
and
very, very
I
good
appreciate
to
you
us.
for sharing that. Yeah.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, Tony, man. We'll definitely do this again in the future, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for your time, and love what you're doing out there.
Thank
I
you.
read your newsletters, by the way, so. And I
I
did see
appreciate
that.
that.
I did see that guy comment what you posted this morning. So
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's just the beginning, man. We're gonna
yeah,
keep growing.
we'll do it again. All right. Well, hey,
Cheers,
have a
brother.
wonderful day.
You too,
Thank
Tony.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning into the show. If you found value in what our guests shared and what we share on the show, please feel free to share with your friends and family. We'd love to see you back here. Thank you again. And you can find us on pretty much every social media channel: YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Step into the unscripted arena.
This podcast episode was recorded and produced at Zekin Podcast Studios. For more information, visit zekin.com/podcast.